Hello. I was just looking through messages, emails, and comments that I tend to not respond to very often, and mainly because I don't really know how to choose. But I think it's finally time to make this video, one I've been putting off for a while. There's just so many to choose from. But some of the most frequent messages I get involve, can you make this for me? Or can you give me the details and such of a costume or historical something or the other? And the other one is, what's your favorite sewing books? So there you have a glimpse into my Instagram messages, my email inbox that is exponentially growing on a daily basis. But this video isn't about my disregarded inbox. The answer to the first question is no. The answer to the second one is no. As for the third one, I don't usually answer because it's a hard one. If I did answer, it would probably be a list longer than your arm. So I just tend not to answer, which is really bad. So instead, I'm going to make this video. Just go and search sometime sewing books or historical sewing books, and the results are nearly endless. How do you choose which ones are worth it? Is the super expensive one really that helpful? I'm gonna touch on some of these questions, but before we do, it's important to keep in mind your particular use you have in mind for the books and the information you're wanting to attain. Because believe me, once you start looking, you'll be swept into a rabbit hole of adding books and books and books to your cart because they're so shiny and pretty and look so useful. And then you never use them. Not at all, talking from experience. But yes, this video is all about my top favorite historical costuming sewing books. So first of all, that's all of them. And don't get too scared. I'm not going to go and suggest that you make purchases of all those books. That would be a lot of money. That would be a lot of just information that you might not need. So I've broken down my favorite books into categories of why they're my favorite, so you can easily sort down which ones best suit your purpose. Another note, these are historical costuming books. They're not just generic sewing books. Honestly, I don't use just sewing books. I own some, but I never use them. Though I might add, even on my non-historical sewing projects, I actually often reference my historical sewing books for techniques, ideas, and inspiration, just in general. But without further ado, let's get into it. First category, the must-haves. Without a doubt, these are the ones which will forever grace my I'm researching a project pile of books pulled off the shelf. Authentic Victorian Dressmaking Techniques. It was first published in 1905 and was considered the first modern American sewing book. So I've actually never read it, as in read it from cover to cover. I reference the parts that pertain to the certain thing I'm doing. It's just a really hefty read, but there are pictures and diagrams, so that's really helpful. So this book is it's really valuable to see into the mind of the seamstress of this era. Next one, Costume in Detail by Nancy Bradfield. It's really an absolute dream of a book. It's literally all sketches that show the actual construction and details of historical gowns and all the little notes written out. It's an amazing book to look through, plus the information of the actual details and designs and etc. It's really just invaluable for any project that I'm researching. Now we're gonna move on to a different category, but there are some other must-haves for me, but they are more specific in the actual need of the book. The ones with patterns. These are the most valuable of my book stash in the sense that if you spent X amount on an actual sewing pattern versus how many patterns you get in each of these books, you're going to save hundreds of dollars by just buying these books. So of course the drawback is the fact that they are all scaled patterns. They're not full-sized, ready-to-use pattern. You have to scale them up and adjust them to your size. Personally, I way more prefer this scaling up and adjusting work than having to work with a regular pattern, which usually needs a bunch of adjusting anyway, but that's just a personal preference. Anyway, the must-haves in this particular category: Pattern of Fashion by Janet Arnold. Based on the time period that I like and will probably never venture later then, I only own Patterns of Fashion 1 and 2. These two books cover from 1660 to 1940 and have the patterns from extant garments ranging all in between those dates. So all in all, even if I don't use the actual pattern sewn in the book, I find it extremely helpful to look at the pattern and the shapes and the details and get a good idea of the different eras and the patterns and construction of that era. So this is a must-have in this pattern category. Now for a few books in this category that I either don't use a whole lot or actually haven't ever used, but when the time comes, they're going to be very useful. Authentic Victorian Fashion Patterns, A Complete Ladies' Wardrobe. All the patterns in here are from an 1890s wardrobe, and that's why I haven't used it yet. I haven't made anything from that decade. But if or when I do, I'll definitely be using a pattern from it or as a pattern guide of some sort. And then Regency Women's Dress by Cassidy Percoco. I probably pronounced that wrong. All the patterns in here are specifically for 1800 to 1830, and I have yet to venture into this era, but looking through the details and the patterns in here, I again will be using it when I get into that time period. The American Duchess Guide to 18th Century Dressmaking. I'm sure you've heard of this one and you probably own it, but again, this is very specifically for the 18th century, as the title says, and I haven't gone into that century of clothing yet, but when I do, I feel like this video is becoming a showcase of all the decades and centuries I have yet to get into, and all the things I haven't done yet. But I do have proof that I actually do use some of these books and have sewn historical things before. Stays and Corsets by Mandy Barrington. If you're going to make your own stays or corsets, you need these. I say these because there's 1 and 2, so you need them in your life. This is the most important book when it comes to stay and corset making. Nothing beats them, in my opinion. She walks through the process of drafting a stay or corset in your size, your specific measurements. So there's a bunch of corset patterns in here, and with each one following her instructions, you can draft your own stay or corset pattern that's specific for you and your body. It's a really fun process. A lot of numbers involved and measuring and all that, but it's worth every bit of the time spent. So now for a few books in the pattern category, but are also in the good information category. The Cut of Women's Clothes by Nora Waugh. I think you pronounce it that way. This book covers from 1600 to 1930, and not only are the pattern diagrams from all those years, but there's also a lot of information about the fashion and details of each of those eras. So it's not a book I've read, again, but I've referenced a lot of different parts from it for different projects and such. And then Corsets and Crinolines, also by Nora Waugh. This is where I got my pattern for Cinderella's corset. I did need to adjust it a bit, but it gave me a great starting point. And the information and the patterns in this book range from 1500s to 1920s. And as the title says, it's not just about the corsets, but the crinolines as well. So the bustles and the hoops and such. So just really good information about the structure and understructure of historical fashion. The History of Underclothes by C. Willett and Phyllis Cunnington. Scandalous. The underthings of historical fashion is one of the most important parts of the project. It's the things that form and shape the correct silhouette. And this book does a wonderful job at walking through those underclothes, which also includes things like chemises, drawers, petticoats, and nightgowns. The information in here spans from the medieval ages through the 1930s, so just overall, there's just a lot of info in here. And then there's How to Read a Dress by Lydia Edwards. It explores the changes of fashion from the 16th to the 20th century. I find it especially helpful because it simply points out the different aspects of an era. And there's also, if there's a certain name for that thing, it's easy to identify what it's referring to. So just a good reference guide. Now onto my favorite category, because it's just fun. The Looky-Loo books. It's just like what it sounds like. These are the ones that are simply to look through. They hardly contain any words or information, but are the ones that most inspire me. They're kind of what you would call the Pinterest without internet. They're the ones I pull out when I'm dreaming of a project or wondering what details I could add to a dress or accessories or anything of that sort. Just really, I pull them out and look through them. First one, Victorian fashions and costumes from Harper's Bazaar. This one spans from 1867 to 1898. And then Victorian Fashions, a pictorial archive. The year on this one ranges from 1855 to 1903. And then Victorian and Edwardian fashions from La Mode Illustrée. I probably pronounced that very poorly. But this one ranges from 1860 to 1914. So as you can see, these are the books that have the most sticky notes and such. When I see a particular sketch of something I sticky note it so it can be easily found again. And the different colors of the sticky notes are for the different decades of fashion. So sticking with the idea of this is Pinterest before the internet, the color coding of the sticky notes are like the different Pinterest boards. But anyway, these three books are all collections of drawings and fashion plates from the Victorian era. You could probably find all of these drawings and such on the internet, but having physical pages to look through, there's just something about that. It never gets old. So yeah, these aren't necessary to my collection, but I'm glad I have them. Now for some books that I don't really want to include in this Looky-Loo section because I do think they have a bit more value to them than just for looking. But for the most part, I just look through them. The series of Fashion in Detail from the Victoria and Albert Museum. And there's underwear, 18th century, 19th century, and 20th century. The close-up photos in these books are incredible. You can't even find some of these detail shots online. Some of the photos are so close up, you can see the tiny, tiny little stitches or the weave of the fabric, and it's just chef's kiss. But at the same time, they're not necessarily completely practical for the art of actually sewing historical things. So just a luxury book to look at. Then on the same note, these very big books. Fashion, a History from the 18th to 20th Century. As you can see, there's two books. It's the collection from the Kyoto Costume Institute. And as with the Fashion in Detail series, the pictures in these are so good. It's an older publication, so some of the pictures are a little blurry, but still a real treat to look through. So there you have it, some of my favorite, most frequently used historical fashion books. And of course, the links to all these books will be in the description. But before ending this video, I want to share some wonderful free sources for historical research. All the volumes of Godey's ladies' books are free to view and some even free to download via archive.org and Google Books. Archive.org also has many volumes of the World of Fashion and Continental, word I shouldn't try to pronounce. I love the content in these publications. And again, archive.org, there are several volumes of the Repository of Arts, Literature, Fashion, and there's a few more subjects in there, but it's the first three that most interest me. I could keep naming books and periodicals from archive.org, but it would take me forever because there's just so much on there. It's really, really amazing that it's all free. So definitely take advantage of that. I've linked a Pinterest board down below, which contains direct links to all of these free sources, and I kind of have them all organized. I highly recommend taking advantage of it. As I said it before, take advantage of the free stuff. And with that, I hope this was helpful. And I now have a video I can automatically respond with to those messages, emails, and comments that forever get unresponded to. So thank you for watching, and happy historical reading and inspiration.